Want to welcome everybody to another episode of Ramble and Mosey. I'm your host, Jonathan Jaros, and joined today with Megan Motil from Parallel Solutions. Megan, how's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me again.
I'm pretty excited about today's conversation, and I know I say that a lot, but we've got a couple of my favorite state employees, actually like top 5 favorite state employees for the state of Michigan. We were kind of joking earlier on that lots of different options for titles for today's session, and I think the one that I like the most, honestly, is the GSD boys, which is not German Shepherd Dog. It's actually Get Stuff Done. So these are two of our friends that really, I think, have pretty dramatically changed both the tone and tenure of how their programs are deployed. And it's been very intentional. So I'm excited to have Clay and Dan with us. Dan is the chief of the financial operations division, which we'll make him explain in a minute what exactly that is and does, because it's got to be more exciting than it sounds on titling. And then Clay's joining us as the grants manager for the Department of Natural Resources for that division. Also very exciting, like cool stuff, cool community impact from both of these guys. So Dan and Clay, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Happy to be here. As always, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, for sure. So Dan, that wasn't meant to be a jab so much. Tell us, financial operations for the DNR has got to be a complex shop. Tell us a little bit about what that actually is.
It is. I think the easiest way to depict it as the business arm of the organization. So sometimes I refer to us as an umbrella because we provide coverage across the department in terms of our resource divisions like Parks and Recreation, Fisheries, Wildlife, Law Enforcement. Sometimes I refer to us as an octopus because we get tentacles into lots of unique places. But we're assembled a really diverse group of teams. So Clay represents the majority of the department's public-facing grant programs. We also oversee procurement, so anything the department needs to buy, from airplanes to fish food. We also oversee budget and finance for the entire department. So technically I serve as the chief financial officer for the DNR. A couple of years ago, we had the minerals management group join us. So overseeing all of the statewide oil, mineral, and gas exploration. That goes hand in hand with real estate. So we also have the department's real estate team. Let's see what else. Statewide facilities. So our customer service centers across the state and all of our public-facing staff through those facilities. And you can sprinkle in audit and some other fun activities. But a lot of those groups used to be their own divisions at one point in time. So as you know, the department has shifted and moved around, there's been consolidation. We're probably the newest division along with marketing and outreach, but we are a broad mix of a lot of dedicated people who care about what they do.
Right on. Clay, so then grants falls underneath that umbrella, is that correct?
Yeah, so Dan mentioned grants management section, which where I come into play, and so I manage a staff of around 15 individuals, and we manage 9 public-facing grant programs that go out to a variety of entities, including local units of government, could be tribal units of government, it can be universities and nonprofits, even within our wildlife habitat grant program can be individual landowners looking to do different types of work on their property. So I've been here about a year and a half now. So still working through getting all the different wrinkles of what we do, but really just get a chance to see a lot of really good work happen on the ground through the funding that we're able to support. So.
And Clay, a year and a half, where the department isn't home for you, so to speak, is it? Where are you coming from most recently?
Yeah, most recently I served for about 6 years as the executive director of the Michigan Recreation Parks Association, so also known as MParks. Served first as a board member on that organization for about 4 years, and then was able to be fortunate enough to slide into an executive director role with that organization. So what that organization was about was advocacy, education, a lot of committee work around local parks and recreation agencies. So the membership organization of local parks and recreation agencies. So a lot of, as you know, Jonathan, a lot of advocacy work done on behalf of local units of government. So spent about 6 years in that role, and prior to that, about 20 years in the local parks and recreation space as a programmer and as a director in a couple of different communities.
That's pretty unique, right? I mean, like it's rarer to have someone who's been invested in the field and then move into the DNR. Is that true?
Well, I could probably let Dan speak to this a little bit, but I believe I've been told I may be the first individual to hold this position in grants that was hired from outside of the organization. Now, that may not go all the way back in time, but yeah, pretty exciting opportunity to bring a little bit of an outsider's perspective into a program and a section within our department that that does serve the public, and to be able to bring that type of vision and lens, different lens into the section has been really good, not only for me but for the staff that I work with.
Tell us a little bit more about those folks, right? You said you've got a good cohort that you're working with. Obviously, Megan and I know quite a few of them personally from our on the ground work, but it seems like there's a really dynamic team in place too. Like, how did that just evolve naturally? Has that been strategic sort of over the last few years? How does that look as well in terms of your team building?
Well, I think we're actually starting to see some growth. Is what I think you're kind of looking to is we have just a fantastic group of individuals. First of all, let me just say that we each one of our grant programs has a manager that oversees that grant program, and that would include Land and Water Conservation Fund. That would include our Recreation Passport, as you mentioned. I think earlier, the Trust Fund. Our wildlife program, fisheries program, invasive species. So we've got specialty individuals that cover each one of those programs that have a background in an education that helps, support our resource divisions in some of that work. And then we also, a little bit unique to us, is we have a financial team as well. So we've got a group of 4 individuals. We just hired our third accounting technician that falls within our financial team. So we're building that team out to be able to serve that portion of the work that we do from a customer service perspective faster. So that's been great. And then as we look to the future here coming up as well, we're going to be looking to expand again and bring in an individual that will be able to help us with our conversion and compliance as it relates to the grants. So that's a position that has been desperately needed and can really work in, as you can imagine, our communities that are most at need, to be able to have not only capacity to apply for grants, but to also continue to be in compliance with those guidelines that are set forth. So that's an exciting new opportunity coming up here very shortly. So
we're gonna put a pin in that for the moment. As sexy as conversion and compliance sounds, we'll maybe circle back to that a little bit. Dan, you actually had Clay's position prior to your current role, is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. I've moved around a little bit within the department, so I've been here over 21 years. The first 12 with the Parks and Recreation Division, so I was focused on asset management, capital improvement projects across the state. Back in my day, as I like to say, we were only putting about $2 million out the door for capital improvements in the state park system, which we were actually spending more on utility costs at that point in time. So this was before the recreation passport, so really trying to figure out where we're going to put the bubble gum and duct tape on dams and electrical systems. But I kind of graduated from Parks and Recreation, got my first management job with the Finance and Operations Division, first as the statewide facility manager, and I moved over to Clay's position for the grant programs. I took the assistant chief role, and actually next week will be my 1-year anniversary in the role that I'm serving currently as the division chief.
Oh, that's awesome. And remind me, landscape architect by background, right? Is that true?
Correct. Yes. Yep. Yeah. A couple of years out of college with consulting firms. Actually got exposed to, if you've ever been to Ludington State Park on the other side of the Hamlin Dam, there's a pretty extensive boardwalk system that actually provides barrier-free access into the river. So that was a design project of mine when I was with a consulting firm in Grand Rapids, and that was really the first thing that opened my eyes to the DNR, the state park system. So kind of segued from the private sector to the public sector, and been here ever since.
I've got a question for Clay. Clay, you've worn some different hats now. You've been in the nonprofit sector, you've worked for local government, now you're in state government. What, folks sometimes operating in these different sectors have different conceptions or misconceptions about what state government is or isn't. I'm wondering if coming into state government, if there were any myths debunked for you or things that just felt like you understood something in a different way, any aha moments, anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, as a matter of fact, and yes is the answer to that. I think I said recently in one of our, I think it was our chat with the chief, I have never worked with a group of individuals in my entire life as far as team members who are so devoted and hardworking and connected to the work that they do. And we do tend to be a little bit behind the scenes. We're not out in that public facing world, but the folks that work within the department, within the division, within grants that I've been exposed to really debunked a lot of what you hear about, right? State government and employees and hard work and dedication. And that isn't to say one bad thing about anybody else I worked with. I've worked with some great people, some dedicated people, but the busyness that came with this job, the learning curve for me that came with this job, this was the first time I moved into a position where it wasn't necessarily the logical next step, where I was coming into something where, okay, I already had expertise and I was moving the needle forward. I was coming in with some management skills, but not necessarily the knowledge and the background of grants, and to learn everything that we do. And again, the Natural Resources Trust Fund is the big, bright, shiny, wonderful program that we all kind of connect to. But when we get right down to it, to get into the weeds on some of the other grant programs was just an amazing learning opportunity for me, and made me feel very connected to the team that I both inherited while Dan was here, and we've been able to add some new folks. But their ability to teach me and talk passionately about the work that they do was really eye-opening.
And Clay, you mentioned the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund. I think most of us are pretty familiar with that, but for those that aren't, maybe break that down for us a little bit. What is that thing?
Yeah, so the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund has been around going on almost 50 years. We'll be celebrating our 50-year anniversary of the program in 2026. But that program came to life through with some very smart people in the room, looking at a way that that as we're looking at extracting minerals and extracting oil and gas from our lands, what is a way that we could actually put back into conservation, put back into outdoor recreation in order to kind of help balance that. And so that was the concept that was thought of back then, 1976, was this program was able to kind of earn royalties off the interest of those types of activities going on state lands. And that then was able to, and again, it's been adapted and morphed a little bit over time. But again, in 2011, the fund was able to hit its statutory corpus maximum of $500 million. So it was over that point in time from 1978 to 2011, we were putting money into the fund. Now it is continues to produce interest, which goes out into the granting space that we were able to recognize this past Wednesday with our December trust fund board meeting. So it's a real quick explanation, and I hope that makes sense. But there's a little more that goes into it, but very unique, modeled similarly to the federal program, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, with offshore drilling, but very unique. And I could be fact check on this, but I think we're the only state in the country that has a program like our trust fund program.
So the biggest smile I've seen on Dan Lord's face in a long, long time was actually earlier this week. I saw this giant grin on Dan's face as he announced to a room of probably 80 people, plus the trust fund board and others, that it was going to be a good year. And to quote one of our colleagues, it's party time, baby. So Dan, what exactly was party time? What did we just witness this year?
Well, Clay kind of articulated, how this program began, and the easiest way to describe how it's managed or ran now is like an investment fund. So the interest and earnings that are accumulated each year, managed by the Department of Treasury, are really the driving decision factor for the board. So Department of Treasury says in a good year or bad year, you should spend no more than $20 million to keep the solvency of the program long term. So they mark the market every year on September 30th, and on 9/30, it was a really good investment year to the tune, I think, of 15.4% of a return on the investment balance, which equated to about $108 million. So this is on top of a pretty good year last year. So that really, I think, set the table for the board to go beyond that $20 million threshold and put a little bit more out. But I give them a lot of credit. The board really takes their job seriously. It's a great mix, diverse board that's appointed by the governor on a rotating basis. But the risk factor, of spend it down, as some people might recommend, but then you just erode the base of the grant making program that you have. So it was a good year. They put a little bit more out, and you funded every acquisition application that came through, and I think nearly 70 development projects. So there was a lot of cheers, and Christmas came early.
And what that translates to, roughly 47 million that was sent out? Is that correct?
Right around there, yeah. Between the grants and then you've got to cover the administrative costs, and then a unique part of this program, payment in lieu of taxes. So any land acquired through this program, there's actually a payment that goes out each year to those local units of government where that land sits. So it does return a revenue stream back into those local governments.
What's your advice, either one of you, to local communities who have not yet worked with the DNR, or perhaps applied for a grant or even explored a partnership? What advice would you give them about ways to connect with the state?
Yeah, I'll take the first crack at that. It's a great question, and one that we talk about often within our division. Certainly Dan and I talk about it often, and we talk about it within our section too. Is if you were to break it down, there's a lot of haves and have-nots as far as communities and their ability to apply because of some of the technical lapses that they may have in their specific community. And so really, Megan, the first thing a community has to do, the first hurdle, is to get a 5-year recreation master plan put in place. And that can be a challenge in itself. I've personally worked in an organization where we did it in-house. That's not easy. That's a big lift. That's a big lift on the staff. But if you don't, it also comes with a price tag. Some don't have the funds within their community to pay a consulting firm to come in and help develop and create a master plan. But that's really the first piece, is getting that in place. And again, that lays out your community's vision and plan for your outdoor recreation spaces, and is a big eligibility factor. So, we have 5 regional grant coordinators that are located to cover certain portions of the state. They're accessible, they're wonderful, they're not scary, They are here to help, and I would say that any community could reach out to the individual in their region that covers that, and engage in an open conversation. What are some of the barriers? What are some of the roadblocks? We've worked really hard to create additional relationships over the course of the last couple of years in the foundation space. We've worked really hard to create relationships over the last couple of years with regional planning organizations across the state. And they're sometimes the most connected, right, to local communities. That's what they're there in those regions to do. So reach out to your regional planning organization. Reach out to your local community foundation if you've already got a relationship there. That can help bridge that gap, and then we can make connections and help individual communities, strategize around what it is that they may need.
No, I think Clay, you did a really nice job kind of articulating some of the challenges and constraints that come with grant funding. The programmatic benefit of these dollars, the teeth, if you will, is to ensure public access and use in perpetuity. But we know communities change. The DNR doesn't own and control those sites. People make decisions over time, and I think this is a way to help those communities understand some of those requirements should they make the decision. But really, it's grounded in making sure that communities maintain a healthy ability to receive funding in the future. So trying to add some capacity to what is a very technical piece of a grant program. So Megan, Jonathan, you guys find out a better name than a conversion officer or something that speaks towards what the intent is, please let us know. But it's an opportunity to blend some federal funding with a little bit of state general fund that I think is going to do a lot of good in supporting communities across the state.
What services exist within the department to support communities who might not know the ropes or might be struggling with certain aspects of their project management, compliance issues, those types of things?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I think what we want to talk about it, and again, as Jonathan pointed out earlier, the title may not be, this catchy title of compliance and stewardship position, but we do have staff members who work with communities who find themselves in a position where they've either been forced through, and we look back at the point in time when we were having the financial crisis in the 08, 09, 10, and we were having emergency managers taking over in communities, and they weren't concerned about parks at that time. They were maybe selling land to private development in order to create a tax base or additional tax revenue. That can definitely affect a community and puts them in what we call the conversion status. So they've had a grant that property is supposed to be encumbered in perpetuity for outdoor recreation, and now it is not. So that process is delicate. It can be complex. And it takes a person working in that space that has empathy and compassion, and that can help a community not feel bad about where they're at, but help them understand what opportunities they have to mitigate that problem, to mitigate the situation they're in. And that comes with time and not forcing something that isn't ready to be handled. And again, the hard part is communities that find themselves in that place, it's harder for them to get additional grants, right? Because there's a process, there's a scoring process for all grants, and if you're in that status, you receive a point deduction. So it's this terrible cycle that some communities can find themselves in, and what we want to do is provide support for those that are in that situation, but also support for those on the front end before they get there. if they're having some sort of issue, and we have a dedicated member of our team that can jump in at the front end and help them come up with different processes or solutions or technical assistance or advice that can keep them from going down that road. I think that's one of the really unique and key ideas that we have behind this as a full-time opportunity for somebody to step into that space. And then it's a full-time job, right? Traveling around the state and looking at all these grant-assisted sites to make sure that they are in compliance. I mean, that's a whole nother beast in itself that takes time and man hours to do, and we'll have the opportunity to provide a little bit more of that oversight, which is good, because that points back to helping to keep people out of that, or communities out of that situation. When we have a little bit more engagement on the front end, and we're actually in communities talking to people about, oh, hey, by the way, I saw this, or when we did the site visit, we noticed something was going on. Can you tell us? And maybe we find something out, rather than 10 years later driving by a site and seeing a cell tower erected in the middle of a park that's grant assisted and we didn't know. And so I think that's really what's driving this opportunity to bring this position alive. Dan, it's been a goal of yours, I know, for a long time. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, as far as now actually being able to realize that this is happening.
Well, I joked earlier that we tossed around a couple of titles for today's session, and one of my other favorites that popped up was said with lots of love and respect was Rad Dad and Coach Clay. And I think one of the things that I really enjoy is that both of you have such sort of vibrant lives that also impact how you approach your work. We often sort of ask this question, which is a little tongue in cheek, but I'll ask both of you as well, is what your outdoor identity is. When someone stops and says, "Who's Dan?" And on the street, and chief of financial operations is not the first word out of your mouth. So when someone says, "Dan, what's your outdoor identity?" What's that sound like when you respond?
How long are we going? Did you say today? So yeah, I'll try to maybe weave in a little bit of my family values, like my upbringing, because I think it plays into that answer. So I like telling people that I work for the DNR, but that I grew up shooting hoops, not guns, right? So I grew up in Genesee County, grew up in Flint, was a product of a divorced household. Dad was out in the burbs, mom was in Flint proper. So I didn't know much about the DNR, I didn't know much about the outdoors, to be honest. So Mott Park was kind of my background growing up, and me and my buddies would scramble through backyards and make our way down to the park and fish golf balls out of the Flint River and sell them in the parking lot of the clubhouse. So, took family vacations, got to see some things, but didn't grow up with, I'd say, that traditional hunting and fishing heritage in my family. It just wasn't present. So, as I've gotten older, went to MSU for college, and again, I think the degree path of landscape architecture and some of that consulting work got me a little bit more familiar with the agency, and then this job has given me a great opportunity to see some really unique things in the state. So, Jonathan, you had a graphic. It might have been at one of Clay's MParks conferences from a few years ago, where you had almost like this evolution, right, of an outdoorsman, and I could see myself through some of those images. So, I think when I was younger, it was traditional, school sports, football, basketball, those types of things. Had some opportunities to play basketball in college, chose not to. And this was right about the time that X Games was starting to become pretty big. And so did grow up doing some skateboarding, but I needed something to do in the wintertime when I wasn't going to play basketball anymore. And this was when snowboarding was starting to become popular. And I said, well, I'm going to give that a try. So, about 2 months after that 311 concert, a group of buddies of mine went up to Searchmont in Sault Ste. Marie, Canada, and had a snowboard and just kind of got hooked. So I'd say, in my 20s, there was 20s to 30s, there was kind of the X Games approach, mountain biking, surfing, snowboarding, wakeboarding. as I've gotten older and my body doesn't bounce back as much, and as I need a little bit more calmness and meditation in my life, it's gotten to kind of some of those quiet sports, hiking, paddling in terms of stand-up paddle boards or kayaking. Yes, I've got a Peloton, but I've got a decent road bike too. So I like getting on some paved trails. I'll still do a little dirt trail from time to time. But back to maybe the rad dad side. So, becoming a parent, and then you're right back in those organized sports and activities with your kids. So obviously doing things with them. But as a family, we love to travel. We are boaters, so we do some wake surfing. But, the DNR again has been not only from a career perspective, but just the opportunities we have in Michigan, and just working with colleagues that, Clay talked about the hardworking nature and the dedication. And I'll end with this, that there is a culture within the DNR, and I think it's ingrained in that, our jobs are also our hobbies. They're also our passion. So it's the things we do on the weekends that we're also involved with, Monday through Friday. And that's, that's a motivator. That gets you inspired to go to work and do what we do. So long answer to your question. I'll let Clay jump in there with maybe his outdoor identity.
Yeah, for the record, he's Coach Clay. You're Rad Dad, he's Coach Clay, just in case there's any confusion.
Yeah, no, I appreciate Dan's explanation of timeline and continuum there. So personally, I was fortunate as a very young child. My family uprooted from Michigan for about 9 to 10 years and moved to Northwest Montana, about an hour and 20 minutes south of Glacier Park on a large freshwater lake known as Flathead Lake. It's the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River. So I grew up in a northwestern Montana a budding tourist community at the time in the late 70s. My dad worked construction, worked very hard in the summertime, but we always found time to recreate. So I grew up in a traditional hunt fish type of environment and family. Everything from small game hunting, deer hunting, going elk hunting, out on the lake fishing and ice fishing. Grew up for about 6 years while we were there on a small farm. Had horses, learned to ride horses. My dad dabbled in quarter horse racing, so we traveled the state. Was able to see different parts of the state and be exposed to a lot of different activities. I too was a sports kid. Grew up playing the traditional sports, baseball and football with my buddies and soccer and whatnot. We moved back to Michigan when I was about 13 or 14. And then I started to learn how cool our state is, right? My home state, what types of activities and outdoor opportunities we have here. And when my Western friends would say, Clay, you grew up on the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River, I would say, I live closest to 5 of the largest lakes in the world, and I can drive there in half an hour. So come see Michigan. Like Dan, I went off to college. I didn't know any of this type of work really could be where I would find my passion, and this is I'm going to show a total amount of you guys can make fun of me in this story, but I remember looking at my college roommate and saying I was struggling, right? It was my freshman year in college. I was struggling academically. I said, I need an easy A. I need something that I can get an A in. And he looked at me and said, hey, I was looking through the class selection list and there's this outdoor rec class. It's got to be the easiest thing we can do. We signed up, and the funny part of the story is I got a B-. I'm like, I didn't even get an A. But I was immediately hooked with the program. I immediately knew that's what I wanted to do to continue my education and my life in this outdoor recreation, environmental recreation space. Was totally going back to Glacier or that area for an internship. Met my wife 6 months before graduation. That put a halt on moving out of state. And lo and behold, things, we got married and started to have kids. And then Jonathan, became Coach Clay. Like, I coached my children from the time they were old enough to put a glove or a ball, bounce a ball, kick a ball, to the point that we handed them off as freshmen in high school. So I spent a lot of time not recreating personally. And now that they've grown and moved on, I am back to finding that passion. And that really comes in the form for me in kind of the getting back into the hiking space, planning different activities that my wife and I can get involved in, and kind of moving back into that recreation that filled my bucket years ago. So yeah, long way to say, I mean, through life you're exposed, things change, you kind of come back to it. You've heard me say I want to get into this mountain biking scene a little bit and kind of get my feet wet and doing some more of that type of recreation. But yeah, throughout the years it's changed. My outdoor identity has changed, and I'm glad for those experiences and back where I'm at now.
So I want to pull on a couple of threads from both of your comments. Clay, you just shared that mountain biking would be something, for example, that you want to spend a little bit more time doing. I also know firsthand that work has at least twice gotten in the way of you and I going out for a mountain bike ride, right? So, and then Dan, you alluded to this a little bit too, that the upside to the culture within the department is that who people are is also what they do, right? Like the job and who you are as a person aren't different things. So how do you guys manage those two worlds at the same time, right? Like not so much where is the separation between your worlds, but how do you dance between those two so that you can continue being, awesome partners and awesome fathers and great colleagues to work with? How do you dance that? How does that work for you?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it comes down to prioritizing for me in making a concerted effort. And I'm very proud of what I do, and I work very hard at what I do. But I'm more proud of the family that I have, the life that I've created, and so it's really, Jonathan, for me, it's just being able to put it down. And I think one of the things that I'm thankful for here at the department is that there is a little bit more of that flexibility to put it down at the end of the day. Whereas in the nonprofit space and where I was with you a few years ago, that sometimes can continue well into the night. That can continue, it's a lot of events and managing things. And it's not a slower pace, but it's a more I guess, structured, which has helped me, which is something I was seeking, which has helped me then put some focus back on some of the other things personally in my life that were important as well. So I think through the transition into this job, although it's crazy and there's a lot of work to do, and sometimes we feel like we're the tail's wagging the dog a little bit, it has helped me to refocus on those things that are important in my personal life.
Yeah, Jonathan, I'll answer that a little bit differently than Clay. I think the blend between work and life. There's not a real solid divide for me, but on the work front, I think what keeps me motivated and pushing forward has a lot to do with maybe that non-traditional upbringing, but just really intrigued in the work that we do as an agency. So I ask a ton of questions, and I talked about like that umbrella that we are as a division. We get to be involved with a lot of stuff within the department. So continued exposure to hunting and fishing and snowmobiling and all these activities that maybe I didn't grow up with, but all of a sudden, can become new hobbies and activities. And again, that exposure to what we have in Michigan in terms of public land and access, to be able to weave that in on the home front. I think about some pretty cool bookends of what I've seen working for the agency. So early on in my career, I was able to see the Burnt Bluffs petroglyphs up in Garden Peninsula by Fayette State Park. Like, I had never been to the Upper Peninsula as thoroughly as I have in this position. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was in the Detroit salt mines because they hold a lease with the state of Michigan. So not only being able to like tell some of those stories to the kids and the wife when we get home, but like, hey, we're going to make a trip to the UP and you've got to see some of these things. And so getting off the soccer fields and the basketball courts and kind of the school athletics, but to weave in the trail experiences, the water experiences, and just like the body craves motion, the mind craves stillness. And it's usually out through those walks in the woods where things are still churning from work, from Monday through Friday through the weekend. And, the work brain never really turns off. It's a tough balance, especially with, a wife with a career and couple active teenagers that are, getting ready for college. But, I don't know, try to blend it all together and make sure that I'm balanced in my priorities and definitely put family first.
I think the other thread I want to pull on a little bit, if I can, is and Megan, will make you an honorary Michigander for this next question, because I think you would have been in these same places growing up, at least. In Central Ohio, certainly not much different. Clay, you and I were probably at the cabin drinking beer together in our 20s. Dan, you and I were probably crushing POW together at Searchmont, also in our 20s. Megan, you and I were probably at the same Dead show at some point. None of us knew each other at that point in life, but yet in weird and great ways, right? Like, we're all kind of stuck with each other now. Sorry, you're stuck with me. But especially with your kids, and Megan, for you as well, like, where are you seeing their communities being created around, right? So we have a shared common narrative, regardless of whether we had relationships at those times, but we've got a commonality that we can talk about and think about. Where do you see your kids creating those shared narratives or those shared experiences, and how do you see that sort of projecting into how they're going to be caretakers for what's next, right? Whether that's our parks or our playgrounds or sports, those kinds of things. Where is that coming from now? Where are you seeing that coming from?
So what comes to mind when we say that, right? So I've got a 17-year-old son who's a senior, and our daughter who is a sophomore who's 15. And obviously, their attachment to screens and social media, like there's no denying it's way different than when we were crushing POW up in Searchmont, right? We weren't editing our GoPros and posting that live at the end of the day. And as much as my kids might want to admit it, like I feel like I have a good positive impact on them, and I see that come out as we drag them around the state and have them do different things that at the time they say are boring, but they're also getting their selfies in, right? And these cool backdrops that Michigan has to offer, whether it's Sleeping Bear sand dunes or pick your campground across the state. And then there's also, I think, some of the storytelling that I've caught them, explaining to their friends about maybe whether it's Michigan's geology or different fun facts that might land on the kitchen table at some point through our family meals. But it's definitely different, but I think it's just that continued exposure and education. Like, I think it took me a long time to realize like how awesome Michigan is and how much we truly have. Growing up, like my whole plan was I'm getting out of here. I'm going west to Colorado or California or someplace. And yeah, I've visited and traveled and done that, but Michigan is special. And so I'm just trying to maybe ingrain that on my kids as they start to chart their lives forward and solidify a little bit more of their recreational activities or what they see as community with their friends. So you said it was an easy question, but I don't think it is. So I'll see if anybody else got an answer.
Yeah, there was a lot of sarcasm built in there.
I think one of the things that we've tried to do for the kids is again, we enjoy traveling. we don't only enjoy our local parks and our state parks, but we have tried to get our kids out and exposed to travel in our national park systems, which they love. And we've been able to have some really good family discussions during some of these travels, and it's piqued their interest in different things along the way. And as Dan said, with technology and we can sit in the living room for 3 hours, all 5 of us, and not say a word, and all have a kinked neck looking up from the phone. But when we're on those types of trips, whether that be in state or whether that be out of state, we really do connect. They ask questions, we share, we talk about, the next place we want to go hike, what's next on the bucket list. Jonathan, I've shared with you, the next thing is Yosemite, right? That's one of my youngest is just enthralled with getting out and seeing Yosemite and doing that. And for him, he's 21. He caught the bug. He likes to hunt fish, and he's running himself smack dab into the same program at Central Michigan as what I graduated in, and going through the outdoor and environmental recreation program. So it has had an effect there. For my other two, again, being outdoors, playing sports, hiking, doing all of those things, I don't think they'll ever lose that. They truly enjoy doing those things, and I think that's just, again, it's through exposure. To Dan's point, it's boring. Do we have to get back in the car? Are we really going on another 2-hour ride? But when you get there and to your point, Dan, they're taking a selfie and posting it on their whatever social media channel, like, look where I am, and those are fun things to see. So hopefully we've done a little bit to cultivate them and wanting to be, positive outdoors. Positive outdoor influencers throughout their life.
So I have 2 girls, 15 and 19-year-old, and I moved to Traverse City right after college. So I moved up here in 1999. I did not grow up spending a lot of time outdoors. I mean, I did it in the neighborhood, riding bikes, walking to the pool, playing with my friends, mostly in this little scrubby patch of woods in between the suburb where I lived and the farm field that was about to become another suburb. But when I moved up here, I moved here because of the landscape, because of the natural resources, because of the trails, because of the parks, because of the lakeshore. So I wanted to experience that. That's what brought me here. And so I've tried to create experiences for my kids that highlights that. Sometimes that feels like forced family fun to them. I know, like we do a Mother's Day hike every year, like a spring ephemeral hike. And it's definitely, as they've gotten older, like feels like I have to really convince them, like, this is what mom wants, but they all know what a trout lily looks like now. Right. So it's like something stuck. And they, when they were little, we would go, a group of women and I would take our kids camping out to Manitou Islands. And that felt really special. And even though they probably complained while we were there about the bugs or the heat or having to carry water a mile from the water pump to the campsite, they still go back and look through those photo albums. And I know they had a great time. And I know they'll remember that forever. They'll remember sleeping on the beach and waking up in the morning and, just seeing the water and the sort of endless sky around them. So I think those types of experiences, when you have them as a child, like, they never really leave you. And that's part of what brought me up here, was I had these childhood experiences on vacation, and I was really carrying that vision in my heart. And I'm happy to be able to share that with my kids now. And I do think now that they're teenagers, they find their own fun. So, now that one of them has a driver's license, they'll just find a spot to watch the sunset together with their friends and go off and do that. And I don't know if you can call that experience in nature or not, but they're outdoors. They're taking in their surroundings and they're spending time together and connecting with each other. And it's just great to see them finding their place and finding it together like that, their places.
No, you raise a great point, Megan, and I think you've all heard this before. It's one of my personal soapboxes, right? That we create this definition of what being outdoorsy or being outside is supposed to be. And if I take the dog for a walk after work, is that being outdoorsy? If I watch a sunset, is that hardcore enough? And that's, I think those are hangups from the origin of a lot of the movement. Outdoor light, I heard it referred to recently, which kind of stuck a little bit, right? Because does it have to be a light versus a heavy version? I mean, it's still the same awesome experience. I do wonder, though, when we think about the trends that we're seeing in outdoor participation, we're seeing more people engaged in the outdoors, more people of color, more people of diverse identities identifying as outdoorsy, however they define that. We're seeing increasing numbers. We're also seeing decreases in the amount of time that someone dedicates to a particular experience, right? So watching the sunset is definitely being outdoorsy, but it's also not something that requires weeks with a laden backpack to experience. So with that in mind, that changes, I think, a lot of our funding models, and I think it changes a lot of our expectations on user experience. And I wonder, not so rhetorically, are we prepared financially and strategically to be able to meet who's next rather than thinking about what was? And so Clay or Dan, I wonder, I'll pose it that way, I guess. Are we ready? Are we thinking about how we're going to be ready? What's that path look like for us to be able to lay the road for who's next? So that Clay's grandson can also get a B+ in outdoor rec and have a illustrious career.
So are we ready, Jonathan? My mind goes in a couple different directions for that. I'll start with our existing maybe land mass, right? Like the availability of public land in certain parts of the state is pretty strong. Specific to the DNR, we always talk about north of the Knuckles, right? And clear and north, the majority of the state forest system. I think over the years, the department has started to, I'll say, diversify where some of their investments are and their participation is. You can look at, the Detroit Riverfront, Outdoor Adventure Center, Belle Isle, and more recently the Flint State Park, right? So recognizing that as an agency, we need to be mindful not only of maybe the traditional landmass that we have, but also where we haven't been, and trying to engage differently at a community scale down south where the people are. From a funding perspective, it's a similar dynamic and challenge where a lot of the land that we're responsible for was tax reverted. On top of that, a lot of the land was acquired with, federal funding sources that, come with some strings attached. It costs more now than it did 10 years ago to take care of the land with the same amount of staff and equipment and improvements that people expect. So I think we've got a lot to leverage in the state in terms of land and programs like the Natural Resources Trust Fund. But there's also, that transition of models and fund sources. So it's great that we have Dingle Johnson and Pittman Robertson and people who buy firearms and ammunition, and those federal funds can flow to us. It's great that we have license opportunities for people to participate in some of these sports, but I also think that of course, licenses are barriers, right? There's a cost to participating. You guys know the gear. But I think as an agency, what can we do? We can continue to look at more ways of getting public land access in the communities, right? In people's backyards, and not you have to spend 2 hours in an automobile to get someplace that's cool. So, that trust fund, again, is a great example of an acquisition arm and a development arm. And to be able to continue to fund those in communities and make those opportunities available is a great start. I think there's some exciting things on the horizon as we continue to transition in the energy sector. So you talk about a program that was rooted in a non-renewable like oil, gas, and minerals. We're talking about putting carbon in the ground. We're talking about solar. We're talking about other funding sources that generate revenue. And we need to be as thoughtful as the creators of the trust fund for these other things that will generate revenue. And how do we as a community want to continue to invest them with the type of a successful model like the trust fund?
Oh, I honestly don't know a whole lot more to add. I was gonna, focusing on the funding side, Jonathan, to your question, and are we ready from a funding perspective? Dan brings up a lot of good points about, right, the new way that we need to look at some of those resources and how they may be able to model after something like the trust fund. But I also would, say we need to do a better job of leveraging our partnerships. And that's not just the department, that's across, right? That's across a lot of different sectors. We all very well know there's a lot of foundations, there's a lot of other organizations that find passion around the same space and want to, make sure we have a clean environment, want to make sure we have an accessible environment, want to make sure that kids both in urban and rural and suburban settings have an opportunity to experience similar things. So I guess that's what I would add to what Dan already said is really being forward thinking on what do those partnerships look like, what do they continue to look like, and not put up the barrier that that's really hard work, because that is really hard work. Leveraging partnerships, having those conversations, putting the right people in the room, having disagreements and working through it. It's easier to say, let's just keep the status quo because that's what I know. But I think if we continue to push the envelope around who can play in the same space, we might be very surprised at the funding opportunities that could open up through that type of engagement.
Kind of along that same vein, I'm curious if there are partnerships that you feel have made that kind of impact you're talking about. Are there any examples that you can share that exemplify maybe the kind of leverage or embracing of change that you're talking about?
I guess the easy one to point to and most recently would be, as you guys, at least that we're talking to right now, are very well of, the federal funding that came to the states through the COVID resources, and made available, and we were able to be lucky enough within the department to receive a chunk of that funding to stand up a new grant program, right, that's able to service some of the hardest hit communities in the state. And one of the success stories, and again, it's difficult to measure right now because it's still so new, but just that space of engaging with, like I said, those regional planning organizations, those community foundations, both at the local level and the Council of Michigan Foundations kind of overarching, the involvement with, the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation and how they had some impact there, and to be able to leverage philanthropic dollars with the public and federal dollars that came in, will no doubt have a success story to tell when this is all over. Again, that funding, as we all know, has some sideboards on it, and there's a lot of things that we're managing on the department side and grants to ensure that those funds are spent in a timely manner. But it'll be so neat to look back at what not only that funding, but was leveraged both in partnerships and in additional funding. What does that actually build? When we look back after December 31st of 2026 and we look at our performance indicators and we have that portfolio of X amount of miles of trail, X number of, accessible playgrounds, X number of whatever that may be, that's going to be, that's going to be a success story that what that we should have been thinking about before we had to have this influx of federal funding that forced us into a position where we had to put together a team of individuals to stand up a brand new program and all get in the room together, right? I think that forced us, at least in my opinion, related to that process. And it shouldn't have to be that way, but sometimes that's the only way it does happen. So I think that example right there, Meg, I mean, that to me is one that's recent and new, and we can kind of grasp onto. And I just had a conversation today with our partners from the Michigan Association of Regions, as well as Council of Michigan Foundations, and as they're sharing stories about some of these communities that they're helping to support, and they're sharing some of the feedback they're getting, how some of this funding is transformational for certain communities, and it's transformational because they have the support of others to help them kind of recognize and realize their potential in that community, and it really was rooted in equity and really rooted in public input, and not a city council or a staff sitting in a room saying, this is what our community wants. We know this. We don't have to talk to them to find out that it really isn't. Why isn't that park being used? Why aren't people on that trail? What's the matter with our community? Well, we don't need to invest money because they don't use the stuff they already have. Well, this has opened that new opportunity. So I guess that would be, the first one that comes to mind.
I mean, Megan, I'll just talk at I'll call it the global level, right? Because there's so many partners and entities and individuals and organizations that are passionate about public land, about access, use, enjoyment, recreation, both passive and active. That you could look at the National Park Service, and Pictured Rocks and Sleeping Bear at that type of a scale or level. But, I give a lot of credit just globally in our state, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, but, local units of government, whether it's the county, the village, the city, the township, while everybody doesn't have a park and recreation department, right, there usually is something nested in a community that is around the passion for outdoor recreation and land access. The work of other partners like Heart of the Lakes, like M-Parks, like TNC, the list goes on and on of entities that are outside of government but have similar and aligned goals. So I know Clay went into a very unique and specific program, but I think what's nested there too that Clay talked about is philanthropy and foundations. A lot of times they have, I'll just say, like-minded passion and goals to provide for the people they're intended to serve, just like government is supposed to do. So kind of a higher level answer, but you could talk about a lot of different unique and special relationships and examples that are nested there.
I just want to add on to that real quick if I can, because Dan mentioned something that I meant to. I think the other, positive relationships that have shown some real movement in things is exactly what Dan just pointed out. Jonathan, your organization, Heart of the Lakes, the connections that you have to the regional land conservancies throughout the state and their connections to philanthropy, the M-Parks folks who have those really solid connections back to local communities, and then leveraging in those local communities what's available there. Those are just, what you guys do at that level is invaluable. So I think it is important to also just mention, look at the obvious partners that are sitting here, but actually understand what they do and what they bring to the table. It's easy to sit down and talk about, hey, we're going to have a meeting to discuss this, but what does it actually bear in the end? Jonathan introduced me to a lot of people when I came into M-Parks, and a lot of connections and a lot of opportunities. And I'll always look back at that as, that's an important part of of everything that we do. It is those additional connections, but also understanding what they can do and what they can leverage. So I appreciate you mentioning those partners, Dan, because that was my intention as well.
I think what I hear strongly, and I think this is also why there's such a tremendous amount of respect for the work that the two of you do within the department, is that level of empathy. The idea that the narrative of what state government is supposed to be, the narrative of what an external partner is supposed to be, the narrative of what an outdoors person is supposed to be, like without empathy built into any of those, there's just no way for us to kind of continue to grow and to create that evolution that I think Michigan's resources are so much going to depend on. There's also some humility, I think also, and sometimes perhaps too much humility built into the organizations and the departments that we have and the land base and water base that we have, right? We sort of started here early on, but this idea that oftentimes maybe we don't talk loudly enough or speak proudly enough about the people that are helping protect these places and make these places accessible. And I think that celebration and that empathy are two things that the two of you really bring, not just to your roles, obviously, but as people. And so in case it wasn't said, thank you. Not just for being good partners, but for being good people, because I think it's the combination of those things that really makes it happen. Well, Dan and Clay, I know I want to say nothing more than thanks. Megan as well. I think the thing that I learned today, had a feeling for, but really have a deeper understanding for now, is that financial operations and grant section, if I were going to sum it up, really ends up being about experience and empathy and crafting the narrative for our state. I mean, it's I poked fun at you guys a little bit early on about the fun and putting the fun back in finances, but at the end of the day, it really is about the people and the user experience. So thank you so much for your time today on a snowy Michigan afternoon. A reminder that Ramble and Mosey is supported by the C.S. Mott Foundation and the Conservation Fund. Technical support by Anna Moya and thought leadership by Parallel Solutions. So thank you all again. Hope you all get outside and have a great day.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was great. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate the opportunity.